Good morning, everybody. Welcome to another episode of MedWell Unscripted. And it's Valentine's style, so there's love in the air. Are you feeling it, ladies?
Absolutely.
We're really excited to be here today. We have a special guest, and we also, because we love health and your wellness, we actually want to start out telling you a little bit about MedWell Health and Wellness. We are your medical marijuana certification specialists. We have offices all throughout Massachusetts, as well as telemedicine appointments. And today, all of our viewers get a special gift, our love to you. And I'm just going to share my screen here. And today, if you are watching our show, you can receive $10 off your medical marijuana certification by using the word ROSE when you call into 866-566-9333. And can you feel it, ROSE? And for those gentlemen out there and those ladies, and they're thinking about Valentine's Day, get it, ROSE. ROSE is in the air, love is in the air, but we highly encourage you to take advantage of this special offer. It'll be good for 1 week using the code ROSE. Call our office. You can also visit us online at medwellhealth.net. This is for new patients, and this is for recertification patients. Share the love with your friends. Share today's live, and let's make it a Love Fest weekend and a Love Fest day. All right, so let's get into our topic today. I'm so excited. We have Emily Waxman, our Director of Community Outreach. Good morning, Emily.
Good morning.
And we have Emily Elmen. She is an edible connoisseur. Hello, Emily.
Hi.
Gosh, I'm gonna confuse the both of you, right? You're gonna be like, who talks first? So I'd love to get started with just some introductions. So I'm gonna start with Emily. All of our friends in the audience know Emily, and tell everybody a little bit about what you're doing in the community, because you are a busy gal, rocking those relationships.
Absolutely. Yes, I am always very busy out there. I love being able to talk to everyone I can about the medical program here in Massachusetts and what we do and what sets MedWell apart from everyone. I even see I've got Nicole Snow today saying hello, so I just want to give her a big hello and a big shout out to all our friends at the MPAA who we just absolutely adore and love working with. And again, just I love being out there telling everyone about MedWell and being able to meet people like our friend Emily, who's joining us today. So I won't take up any more time. I'll just put it back to you, April, so that we can talk to Emily and hear about our amazing topic today.
All right, Emily, tell us a little bit about you.
Well, I worked in the legal market since 2016 in Massachusetts. I worked at In Good Health for about 4 years. Managing and developing all of their infused product recipes and managing production and packaging of one of the first kitchens in Massachusetts. They started out medical and then became co-licensed with adult use as well. So that was a really great experience. Before that, though, I was heavily involved in the activism community in Massachusetts, working towards legalization for medical use and then also for adult use. I joined MassCan and was part of the board of directors for a couple of years and was an activist with them for many years prior to that. Was heavily involved in organizing the Boston Freedom Rally for many years and really sort of started the sponsorship acquisition program, selling banner space at the stages and just forming relationships with businesses in and around New England and across the country.
Wow. That's interesting. So the first kitchen, can you tell a little bit about that experience? Because I'm sure there's I think before we got on, friends, we were talking a little bit about being behind the scenes in a dispensary, and it's not what you would think, right? So I can't imagine, what was that experience like with kind of the first kitchen and being part of that?
Oh, it was one of the greatest experiences of my life. It was really eye-opening. It wasn't what I expected. It was a lot of work, a lot of physical work, and then turned into a lot of physical and mental work as well as I became the person in charge in the kitchen. I was tasked with developing all of the recipes, thinking about how we were going to package them, and and then also, sending samples out to the lab and interpreting thousands of sets of test results, and fixing problems. If any problems arose, it was my job to reformulate the product and reintroduce it to the market with new production methods so that test results were accurate. And then on top of it, I was managing people in the kitchen and just constantly trying to think of new, exciting products to put out on the market. That was really my favorite part of the job, was being able to be creative. But you have to be creative within the constraints of the regulations in Massachusetts, because they're quite strict. So it takes a special kind of creativity, I think, to work within those parameters and make an exciting product while still following the rules.
Sure.
Absolutely.
So one of the things that you talked a little bit about your advocacy and kind of getting into the cannabis field. What kind of led you to becoming an edible connoisseur? I'm just curious. It's interesting. It started in 2006. I made my first batch of brownies, and I didn't know what I was doing at all. I didn't understand. I had no idea what decarboxylation was, and I didn't understand how to activate THC properly. And so I just heated the bud up in a pan with oil with, I think it was canola oil or butter, and just kind of made brownies thinking I had left it, that I'd heated up the cannabinoids enough. I didn't even know what a cannabinoid was. But I thought I was doing everything right, and I just made my first batch of brownies, no big deal. And then it knocked me out. I was out cold. I was sleeping. Decarboxylated, and my brownies were full of THCA. I didn't know that at the time. Now I know that. And THCA, one of the side effects is it can make you quite drowsy. But I did enjoy the process, and I thought to myself, that was really fun. I'm going to set a 10-year goal for myself, and in 10 years, I will be making edibles for a dispensary in Massachusetts. And I didn't even realize that we were on the cusp of legalization in Massachusetts at that time. I wasn't an activist at that time. I had no idea what was coming down the road for me. I had just set this subconscious goal for myself and just didn't really think about it too much. I just kept going about my life and making edibles from time to time and really enjoying it. And then 10 years, almost to the day, I was hired by In Good Health and became an infused product chef. And
amazing.
Oh,
It
just sort of snowballed from there.
Wow.
That is very cool.
And it's interesting because you talk about, and I know that some of our patients in our audience try to make their own edibles. And so can you talk a little bit about kind of how you learned, some of adding the right amounts of THC and all of that? Like if you were to give advice to a patient, clearly there's a difference of homemade edibles as opposed to going into a dispensary, right?
Absolutely. I think, so one of the hardest things when you're making edibles at home with flower, you're never going to get 100% of the cannabinoids out of that flower. Dispensaries don't even do it, can't even do it. When they extract, their concentrates are generally anywhere between 80% to 90% in the 90s potency. So even they can't get, even with the most high-tech equipment, they can't get 100% of the cannabinoids out. So when you're at home, it's really hard to figure out how strong you've made these cookies or brownies, or how strong your butter or coconut oil is.
Sure.
And I think that, it starts also with knowing the potency of your flour. So if you have lab-tested flour, then you'll know what cannabinoids are in there and the percentages of each cannabinoid in that flour. But then you also have to remember that you're not, you're extracting at home unless you have high-tech equipment at home. And
right.
You're not going to get 100% of the 12% of the THC that was tested in your flower that you either purchased from a dispensary or sent in for testing yourself because you just want to know for your own records.
Right.
So I think that making edibles at home, it's really difficult unless you're going out and purchasing oil from a trusted producer, a dispensary, a manufacturer, or if if you know somebody who makes oil and does a really good job at it, you can get some from them and send in a sample to the lab and get an actual test result. That's the best way, in my opinion, to do it. Because you know exactly what you're working with and you can dose your edibles more easily that way. It just takes a little bit of math instead of math plus guesswork plus intuition.
Well, and it's a hard thing to sample too.
Don't know what kind of oil, what kind of extraction method is best for them. Some people, receive better treatment using RSO or an ethanol extraction,
Right.
full extract cannabis oil. That I think is one of the most popular extractions that people like to use. It's also one of the reasons why legalization happened was because of Rick Simpson oil. It revolutionized and brought to the forefront the importance of cannabinoids in everyday health and maintaining human homeostasis and also fighting off cancer cells and things that are detrimental to our health. And then there's other extraction methods as well. CO2 is a popular one in the dispensaries, and it's also the method that essential oil extractors use to make all of everybody's favorite essential oils that you drop a few drops into the diffuser. That essential oil was most likely extracted using a similar machine that you might find at In Good Health or any of the other manufacturers in Massachusetts or around the country, around the world. A lot of places use the same type of equipment because really you are extracting an oil from a plant, just like you would with lavender oil or chamomile or any other essential oil that you might want to pop into a roll-on for migraines.
What kind of equipment would somebody need? It sounds like it can be a costly venture to do it the right way at home because, I don't, as I kind of mentioned, I kind of was listening to your piece, and it's not one of those things where you probably can eat the cookie dough as you're making it to actually see the dosage because of how it affects. So how does that, what do they need for equipment?
So, there are some tiers of spending that you can spend on equipment. If you are really scraping the bottom of the cookie jar or the piggy bank for money to spend on this, you can use paint buckets, like the empty utility paint buckets that you can get at the hardware store, and start there with just using grain alcohol that you get at the liquor store. You can do what's called a quick soak or a quick wash of your bud flowers in giant mason jars and just shake it around, full of ethanol, which is also grain alcohol that you buy at the liquor store, and bud. Shake it up. Let that sit for a little while. Make sure that the alcohol you're using is nice and cold, so that when the buds are put into this cold alcohol, the trichomes pop off a little bit easier because it makes them brittle. And then you want to filter the flower material, the plant material, out of the ethanol or the grain alcohol. And you can use cheesecloth and just a colander. And then you want to evaporate the alcohol off of the actual flower, of the extraction that you've just made. You're going to end up with this giant mason jar full of green alcohol. And full of chlorophyll and cannabinoids, and the little pieces of trichome. The next step is to then evaporate the grain alcohol, because you don't want to it's really unpleasant to consume grain alcohol. It's just going to burn your mouth. Believe me, I know. So you technically have a tincture right there that you can consume. You can add that to a beverage. It's not completely, the cannabinoids are not completely water soluble at that point, but they are dissolved into the alcohol. If you were to drop a dropper bottle full of that tincture that you just made, which I think is also referred to as dragon tears, I think it can be, sometimes it's called that, that ethanol tincture. If you were to drop a couple dropperfuls into a glass of water, over time you would see some separation. You would see the cannabinoids begin to separate again, because the alcohol would be evaporating and all you'd be left with is the oil droplets of the cannabis oil. And oil and water are oil's hydrophobic, so it's afraid of water. It separates from water. But technically you do have a tincture at that point. The next step is to put the that green tincture that you've just made into a distiller. And you can get distillers, it looks like a giant coffee, like a buffet coffee dispenser. So it's probably about the same size, a little bit smaller than the bucket that you were using in the beginning to strain your dragon tears or your tincture into. So you just basically load up that machine with your tincture, press the button, and out the front of the machine will come the pretty clean ethanol that you can then reuse for your next wash. And then inside the machine, you open it up and you're left with this dark tar-like substance, which is your hash oil. Now, technically, it will still need some purging. It's not going to be completely free of ethanol or grain alcohol at that point. You can consume it that way, but it's not what you would purchase from a dispensary. A dispensary goes that extra mile and puts it into an oven, a vacuum oven, and lets the alcohol slowly purge. And that's where you'll often see the videos of what they call slabs in these vac ovens, and you see them bubbling up. And a lot of manufacturers will take videos of the bubbles bubbling up from this concentrate slab because it looks really neat. But really what they're doing is they're purging their solvent from the oil that they've put in. It's basically a more raw version of the oil. Then they put it into the vac oven and they're purging their solvents. And in this case, my example that I gave you, the solvent is the grain alcohol. So once you take it out of the vacuum oven, then you've got basically your finished product, which in the dispensary would be usually packaged into oral syringes. And I do find that those are usually the best way to package your oil because they are metered doses. On the syringe, there are measurement marks. So you know exactly how much you're consuming at one time. And so it's, yeah.
I'm so glad that you painted that picture, Emily, because I don't think that all the folks out there listening have any idea when they purchase these beautiful edibles from the dispensary, really all the painstaking tasks that went through to actually make that finished product. So thank you so much for giving us that detailed explanation of really what goes into it, because who knew that there was that much that, was happening behind the scenes. So that was amazing.
Oh, and that's on a budget. That's on a really tight budget. The dispensaries and manufacturers around the country, around the world, are using CO2 machines. Mm-hmm. So the CO2 is the solvent, and those cost $250,000 and up.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. Emily, can you talk a little bit? So, we have patients that come in and that are just getting started with edibles, and, do you have any recommendations of where they should start and kind of finding the right product for them if they don't want to smoke when the edible is what they want to choose? Do you have any recommendations for them?
So in Massachusetts, the regulations state that there can only be I think they actually changed it to 5.2 0.25 milligrams per serving. I think that was changed recently. I might have the decimal off by a little bit, but it used to be 5.00 milligrams per serving with a maximum of 20 servings per package. So that's actually really great for the new consumer, somebody who's just entering the market or entering the space, because that's a low dose to start with. I wouldn't call it a micro dose. I would call a micro dose, 1 milligram or half a milligram. Yeah. But the 5 milligrams is a good place to start. I think for somebody who's never consumed an edible before, I would probably slice one of those 5 milligram pieces in half and start there, because if you haven't consumed cannabis before, you have no idea how it's going to affect you. Sure. And one thing to remember is that every body is different, and everybody metabolizes food and drinks and medicines and alcohol differently. So I know, for example, I'm a lightweight. I'm a complete lightweight when it comes to cannabis and really any substances at all, including ibuprofen and alcohol. So I know for me, if I was entering the cannabis world, I would also, go start low and go slow, as they say, because cannabis isn't going to hurt. Edibles aren't going to kill you, but you will be uncomfortable. And that can last for several hours, because of the nature of an edible is that it needs to be metabolized, and it needs to pass through your liver and be processed by your body. And even just swallowing a mouthful of water or a piece of food takes, I think, 7 to 10 seconds to actually reach your stomach. That alone takes some time. So digesting and metabolizing edibles and infused products that takes a long time too. So go slow, start low, and see. You have to really learn how to what's called titration. You need to learn how to titrate your dose and figure out what your dose is.
Now, so there's not really it's really all about the dosage. So it doesn't matter if it's a cookie or a chocolate or a gummy or anything like that. It's really just watching the product and how much THC and CBD is in it.
Well, it's a little bit more than that, because the longer the infused product sits in your mouth, the quicker the uptake is going to be, and the quicker you'll feel the effects. And that's because sublingual absorption, because you're bypassing the metabolism part, and you're absorbing the cannabinoids directly under your tongue with that soft tissue in your mouth. You're absorbing the cannabinoids much quicker, second only to vaping or smoking. So vaping or smoking is the quickest uptake. Then there's sublingual, and then there's actually eating and metabolizing. So if you have a lozenge, for example, versus a cookie, you're going to start feeling the effects of the lozenge quicker than you'll start feeling the effects of the cookie, because of the sublingual absorption. Because it's sitting right in between your cheek and your gum for so long that as the sugar starts to melt, the oil that's in those hard candies is then being exposed to your gums and the soft tissue of your mouth. So you're going to feel the effects of that a little bit quicker. The same way if you were eating a gummy and just let the gummy, once you chew the gummy and it starts to dissolve, you just let it sort of sit under your tongue. And I think that's why a lot of people who make gummies like to think of them as fast-acting gummies, or fast-acting gummies, but really it's just because it's sitting in your mouth for a longer period of time. And I think that that's also why suppositories actually work so well too, because you have that same sort of soft tissue that in that other region, and so it's a similar type of absorption. But the way that you ingest or administer edibles is going to affect how quickly you start feeling the effects of the cannabinoids, and also just their overall effect for you.
Fascinating. Emily, so we have, we have lots of people that are interested in getting in the field, and I love to share kind of our guest story of like, how did you learn about all this? I mean, you're like an encyclopedia of edible knowledge here today. So how did you learn about this? Was it just an interest, and then did you take classes? How did you get to be such an edible connoisseur expert?
That's a great question. I wasn't really trying too hard at it. It was just because I enjoyed, absorbing all of the information. It didn't happen overnight. I sort of studied gradually over many years, and it was a hobby for me. And so usually when you're interested in something, it just comes kind of naturally to you, and it's not work. It's just a fun extra thing you do in your spare time. And, I've heard a lot of people say who work in have completely different careers, different industries. If you just keep doing what you like to do, sometimes that hobby can turn into a career.
Yeah.
And for me, that's exactly what happened. I got into edibles in 2006. 2016 is when that was 10 years later, which is not overnight. 10 years later is when I got my first job in the industry. Now, I was working in hemp retail for several years prior to that, but I continued making my edibles throughout that decade, but it didn't happen overnight for me. And I'm really grateful for the experiences that I've had so far, because 4 years in the cannabis industry is like, I don't know, like 20 years in any other industry.
True story.
But I think that it's important, I didn't just, mosey along through my life. I did start to get into the activism community, and I started networking in 2009.
Yeah.
Because a good friend of mine, she's one of my best friends now, but I had just met her at that time, and she looked at me and she was like, "Don't you know that cannabis should be legal? Don't you know nobody should be going to jail for a plant?" And I was like, "Oh my God, how did I not think of that?" Millions of men and women were being wrongfully jailed for small possession of a joint or a small amount of cannabis. And that's when I got into the activism world. And with the activism world came networking events, and I made a lot of connections in the industry. I know that that's so much harder now with the pandemic happening.
Right.
I feel very fortunate that I was able to do that then and not have to jump into it now when everything's virtual, because that just makes things a lot harder. It makes it really hard to form real connections with people versus face to face, shaking someone's hand. So
I know someday we'll be able to give hugs again, right?
No, someday.
What's your favorite recipe? What's your favorite edible?
Oh, my favorite edible. Well, one of my favorite edibles that I made at In Good Health didn't stay on the menu very long, only because it was a lot of labor, but it was delicious.
Labor of love.
Yeah. And I think I made this in the winter time to give people a little nostalgia for summer. And it's a s'mores trifle.
Oh. That sounds yummy.
But it's one of the 4 ounce. It's a 4 ounce mason jar, and you put like you would make a crust for cheesecake. Basically, it's the same idea, except you're using crushed graham crackers with a little bit of infused butter, and a little bit of sugar, and patting that down into the bottom of the mason jar. And then you chop up your favorite infused chocolate bar from a dispensary, or if you make them at home, you just chop it up, as much chocolate as you want. And then what I did was I made homemade fresh marshmallow, and I stuck it on top, and then I torched it so it was caramelized on top, and then sealed it up, and it went out for sale after we got the test results. But you can just use mini marshmallows if you're making it at home.
That sounds yummy.
Oh, it sounds delicious.
And if you're into dabs, then you have a torch at home. Torch the top of those marshmallows. But you pop the whole thing in the oven at about 275, 300 degrees for 5 to 10 minutes. Just keep an eye on it. Take it out of the oven and you've got a delicious memory of summer.
Wow.
That sounds unbelievable.
And you can do it non-infused too. Just use chocolate chips, your favorite chocolate chips.
It sounds divine. It sounds yummy.
It does.
So why don't you tell our audience what you're working on? So you have all this experience. What are you doing now? Like, what projects are you working on? Where can we find you in the future? What's going on in Emily's world?
Sure. So since February, I've been doing quite a bit of consulting work. I've been helping businesses in Massachusetts and in Maine set up their kitchens, decide what kind of layout they need to maximize production, choosing equipment for them based on the products that they want to make, and also designing customized molds for chocolate and gummies, and working on packaging design as well. So I've had my hands busy for the last year or so, even during the pandemic, which has been but yeah, so a lot of design work, a lot of working with architects and researching equipment, and I've also worked on pro formas and business plans for businesses in Massachusetts and in Maine as well.
Interesting.
Yeah, with the growth of everything happening here in Massachusetts, you must be really quite busy. Lots of dispensaries coming into our state, so.
There's a lot of action coming out of the field for sure. Yeah. There's a lot of opportunity out there for people to get their foot in the door if they want to enter the industry. Yeah. I would recommend starting with whatever job they can get.
Yeah.
And then go from there, because once you start working at a company, and you build that trust with them, you can have those discussions about where you want your future to lead.
Great advice. Start
out in the trim room, stay there for 3 to 4 months. And then you can opportunities within the company, because a lot of these companies will promote from within.
Right. Great advice.
Now you mentioned Massachusetts and Maine, so I'm just curious, what's the difference in terms of, are the qualifications or the regulations a lot different, or are they similar? I actually was in Maine a few weeks ago, and I was surprised at how many rec stops there were. Like, literally, we went skiing, so there must have been 4 in the vicinity of the mountain that were there was lots of choices. So is there a lot of difference between kind of on the medical side of things, the difference in the regs?
That's a great question. I'm not an expert on the Maine.
Sure, of course.
But I do know that, because most of the work that I do is actually just designing the kitchens and selecting equipment. The pro formas and the business plans that I've worked on have mainly been in Massachusetts, with 1 or 2 main companies there. But what I was doing didn't too much about the actual regulations. It was a lot of phone conversations and recommendations based on Massachusetts regulations. But I do know that a lot of people from Massachusetts, if they can't find the meds that they need here, they will go up to Maine.
Right.
And I think that the caregiver laws are different up there as well. I think that there's a little bit more leeway than there is in Massachusetts, which I think is going to change as well here. But yeah, and there's heavy tourism up in Maine. So I know that the company I was working with was working on opening a lot of retail stores and cultivation and manufacturing.
Sure.
And they were centering those retail stores in the areas that were high tourism, that had high tourism. So, and I think that that's what all these companies are looking for, is a lot of foot traffic. But Maine in the summertime is no joke. It's crowded up there.
It is, yeah.
But the hot spots get really crowded. So there's a lot of opportunity in Maine. But yeah, as far as the regulations differing from Massachusetts, I know that there's a difference in caregiving ratio, and I think you can go there from out of state, and they'll allow you to purchase product.
Interesting. So Emily, where can people find you? I know we have our rock star Kayla in the chat helping out from our MedWell team, and she has put in your LinkedIn, your LinkedIn profile. Is that the best way for people to reach you?
It is, and my email address is Emily P. Elmen. That's Emily P as in Peter, ELMEN @gmail.com is also a great way to reach me if you have questions or opportunities, or if you have anything. But yes, my full name is Emily Peckham Elmen. It's a little bit of a mouthful, so I tend to shorten it for just sanity's sake in conversation. So yeah, that's where you can find me, LinkedIn or emilypelman @gmail.com.
Awesome. Well, wow. Thank you so much for all this.
Thank you, Emily. That was so amazing. It's so great to be able to bring this education to everyone out there so they really understand really what goes on behind the scenes with edibles and with what they're consuming. So thank you so much for enlightening us today. That was really great.
It was my pleasure. Happy to be here. Thank you.
Thank you. And for all of our friends who have tuned in today, thank you so much. Thank you to Kayla. Thanks, Emily and Emily. And one more time, I do want to share, if you are watching our live today, we are in love and we are sharing the love of health and wellness and offering $10 off our medical marijuana certifications. We have in-person offices throughout Massachusetts as well as telemed. When you are going to schedule your appointment, please use Rose. And again, for those thinking about Valentine's Day, roses are always a good choice, as well as $10 off your wellness. So take advantage of that. If you do have a question, please do leave it in the recording. If you're catching the replay, no problem. We will absolutely sure to get back to you. Thank you so much, everybody. Have a great day. Happy Valentine's Day. And
Happy Valentine's Day.
We're so happy you were here for the love of edibles. This was great. Thanks so much, Emily.
Thank you, guys. Happy Valentine's Day.